Here we are.
Yes,
FiOS
Friday.
1 News, Long Island, New Jersey. Joe Chaffee here.
And FiOS 1 News, Lower Hudson Valley, Joe Rayo on the Joe and Joe Show's version of Open Mic Night.
All right. Ask Us Anything Friday
Yes.
is what we'll call it, and which means that you can ask us anything. Like, what is the average airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
Excuse me?
What's the average airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
I don't know.
Well, that depends if it's an African swallow or if it's a European swallow.
Okay.
It's a Monty Python reference.
I'm sorry. You caught me off guard there.
That's all right. No problem.
I will at the end of the show, though, try to put a brick to sleep if you want.
Yeah, please, by all means, do.
And if anybody has a cat named Tiddles,
Right, you fling her.
wee, wee,
Right.
wee, wee.
Our PETA audience just dropped out. All right, so it's Ask Us Anything Friday. So really, ask us almost anything. Okay.
All right.
We are, we'll talk about Florence. Questions coming left and right, Joe. Already, I am. From what I saw today, it looks like it's looking more like it's going to be a threat for somebody on the East Coast, but I'm not necessarily ready to figure out exactly where, although I kind of have a feeling where I want to go with this. But,
Well, we've been saying for the last several days that you could look on a daily basis where the storm is projected to go, 5, 6, 8 days into the future. But what I have been noticing over the last several days is that each time we have a new run of the computer models, they've been pushing it a little bit further to the west and to the south. And whereas, let's say, a day or two ago, it looked like the northeastern part of the country was going to be targeted and have that storm, Florence, literally in our backyard. Mm-hmm. Now it's looking more and more like the storm is targeting the southeastern part of the Atlantic seaboard, anywhere from, let's say, Virginia Beach on to Charleston, South Carolina. But that's how it looks right now.
Well,
assuming that landfall is, let's say, next Wednesday or Thursday, it's not out of the question that if it continues on that trend, we might be looking at a landfall even further south.
we, I think that's a possibility. I'm on the same page with you with regards to this.
Page 23, baloney.
Right, baloney. Right. It's the hurdles that we talked about yesterday, the wind shear. I can bring it up on the screen. By the way, Chris Vella says finally got some good thunderstorms on Long Island last night. We had to wait all summer long, Chris, to get thunderstorms on Long Island where almost everybody participated, from Montauk to Great Neck, from one end of the western part of Nassau County to the easternmost part of Suffolk. The thunderstorms have been kind of scattered around, and everybody got them last night, even if they weren't exactly long lasting, but it did happen.
It was good to see a good old fashioned squall line that came down from the north, and literally, as you just mentioned, from one end of the island to the other, pretty well hit everybody with lightning and thunder and periods of heavy rainfall. We haven't seen that in quite some time. There have been during the summer places in western Long Island, Nassau County, that got hit. The East End didn't get anything.
Yeah.
So
It was different. Let's put it that
nostalgic.
way. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So I've got the loop up here, and everything is spinning in the Atlantic. So you've got Florence, which is pretty much in the middle of the picture there, and we also have two new tropical depressions. Tropical Depression 9, which is to the west of Tropical Depression 8, which is the one that's close to the African coast.
Right.
And there's some disturbed weather that the Hurricane Center mentions that's off the Carolina coast. And while they don't expect it to develop, I just want to keep an eye on it, Joe, because the models, from what I can figure, actually wind up absorbing a lot of that moisture. Florence does. But sometimes you could have some kind of little mini trough that doesn't show up there, showing up there now. That might have impact on the track overall. I don't see a single model that shows this, but nonetheless, just kind of want to put it up there on the radar screen just to be just to be sure. But in the meantime, you've got all of the tropical Atlantic is basically conducive for strengthening, and it's quite likely that by the time we get to Monday, we will have at least 2 hurricanes, and possibly even 3. That all 3 of these systems will be hurricanes come later on Monday.
Right. Well, Florence dropped from 130 mile per hour winds to a tropical storm, a strong tropical storm, 65 mile per hour winds, but that likely is due to the interaction with and what we've been talking about the last couple of days, the upper level wind shear.
Right.
That is expected to move on through that.
Well, if you notice the tops of the clouds here, they're still moving westerly across just north of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. But that area is sinking south and southwestward. So as that's happening, the wind shear actually has abated somewhat. There's still some of it happening, but it appears that if you look at the cloud covers compared to last night, less of it seems to be blowing off, and it looks like convection is trying to sort of ball up around the circulation center. And the other thing that's happened too, Joe, and this is also ultimately important for the long term in the final track, is the weakened storm responding to the lower level steering, moving from east to west. In fact, it's moving actually south of due west, so it's not gaining latitude, and that increases the probability that it's going to miss the weakness that sets up in the Atlantic over the weekend. None of the models show that trough having any impact.
Right, and the scary thing about it is, Joe, is that by Wednesday of next week, the storm is within a stone's throw of, let's say, the southeast coastline of the United States, and by that time, and of course, the National Hurricane Center has said more often than not that sometimes their projections on intensity of these storms can be off quite a bit, but they are, and it's pretty amazing, they're calling for a possible Category 4 storm at the end of their forecast track next Wednesday, 130 mile per hour winds. I don't ever recall seeing such an increase like that over
is
a
a
span
lot.
of time. It is. It's going to, and if that be the case, somebody, I mean, you're going to see the entire southeastern United States battening down for all she's worth. This looks like maybe a very substantial storm. If it does indeed make landfall somewhere along the southeast coast, let's say later Wednesday or Thursday of next week.
Mike Insignia asks, Long Island coastal effects and rain. Well, look, the track has to be worked out, and I can envision a scenario where very little happens here. If you wind up taking a storm inland into, say, North Carolina or South Carolina, and then it rides up the Appalachians, and then all the rain winds up going to the west, and we're actually sitting here in warm and humid conditions with partly sunny skies, and maybe thinking about that it should be a beach day more than anything else for,
I remember
for
that
Wednesday and Thursday.
Something like that happened in 1979 with Hurricane Frederick. That was a storm that
Yes.
came right after David. David came right up the coast and gave us heavy-duty rains, and there was even a tornado watch posted in advance. But Frederick was an even stronger storm than David. It moved inland along the Gulf Coast, but as you just mentioned, it took a track straight up to our west. We saw hardly anything from David.
And everybody was anticipating getting the same thing that happened with David, where we got 60 to 70 mile an hour winds, as I remember, for about 6 hours.
Right.
It was very fast. But Frederick went west of the Appalachians, and usually when that happens, we get very little, if anything, out of it.
There's one exception to that rule, and that was what happened with Hugo. I think it was 1988 or 89.
There was a lot of wind, as I remember,
Yes.
with that, and that was with the pressure grading, because it was a huge high that was out. I remember it being extremely humid. That's one thing that it was very tropical, and it was very windy, but we didn't get a whole lot of rain out of that, as I remember.
But the winds were fierce. So it's still open ended. If we do see any effects from Florence, it might come as soon as perhaps next Friday. It might not come until Saturday or next Sunday, and then again, as you just alluded to, it might not be anything at all. And as far as coastal effects are concerned, since it goes into that little cove, if you will, in the southeastern part of the country, it will certainly generate a lot of sea swells and rough seas. But as that tries to propagate northward, let's say north of Virginia Beach or Norfolk, Virginia, up into our neck of the woods, the fact that, number one, it's going to be much further away. Number two, as those waves propagate into our area, they won't be quite as severe as what were thinking a couple of days ago when it looked like the storm was going to go right into our backyard. So you know, I feel a little bit better today in regard to Florence' effect on our area.
Right.
You know, and you know, we said, I think it was you who said, what was the storm last year? Irma, was it, or
Irma,
yeah.
we jogged my memory
Right.
about that when we were looking at Irma on models, and I'm going to just pull some up here, where I could remember in the long range where it was taking it to Greenland, and then it was Nova Scotia. I'm
Right.
sorry, then it was Newfoundland, then Nova Scotia, then Cape Cod, Boston, then it was New York City, then Delaware Bay, Chesapeake Bay, and on it goes until it wounds up being reality, which was it rode along the Florida Straits and went into the Gulf of Mexico.
And you know something?
You
I'm
know?
not saying I'm not going to say it's going to happen again, but it would not be at all surprising. Right now, it seems like it's targeting somewhere along the North Carolina or maybe near the South and North Carolina border. And don't be surprised if that thing eventually ends up going even further south and maybe targeting Florida next week.
Well, I kind of look at it like this. Let's suppose that, and I don't know, we don't know that this is right. So this is the European, which basically brings it inland near Charleston, Myrtle Beach. Okay. Again, this is guidance. This is not Bible, but I just want to illustrate something. So there you have the European at Charleston, Myrtle Beach. Then you have the GFS, which actually has it moving, just near or just west of Hatteras for the same time frame. This is next Thursday morning. Then you have the Canadian, which is slower, okay, and winds up eventually turning it west and taking it into Savannah, Georgia. The way I'm kind of looking at this right now is I think that there still might be a southwestward adjustment, but I think the adjustments are going to get smaller and smaller. The GFS would come in. The European will come in. They're getting close to each
getting on the
other.
same
So
page.
and we're
Yeah.
inside. We're inside 168 hours. I'd be shocked to see huge mileage hours at this point.
Right.
All of this, of course, predicates on this. Is predicated on the strength of this upper high, which the Canadian goes absolutely bananas with. But let me just back up. So here's the GFS. The upper high is offshore, and what happens is on the GFS is that the western flank of that upper high weakens enough. You see where that break happens there?
Right
in there. The high just kind of fractures. So it turns it north and just sort of meanders it northeastward. That would be, a pretty solid soaking rain event for us. Maybe not a whole lot of wind, but a soaking rain for a couple of days.
Right.
But the question of the strength of the ridge, I think, is going to be the ultimate determinant here. The European continues to have a much stronger upper high, and in fact, it actually builds the upper high northwestward as the storm is approaching, so that there is no break. This scenario actually could play out dangerously for interior North Carolina, Western Virginia, and West Virginia, because the European stalls it out there for about 48 hours, and they have gotten so much rain this summer that this is probably the scenario that no one wants to see.
This would be the cherry on top of the sundae for rain or whatever.
So look, neither of us are saying, we have not specifically made any kind of forecast at this point, because it's still too far out, and there's still a few issues that I want resolved. I also, I'm not 100% sure yet. We know we can forecast in terms of strengthening, in that conditions are certainly favorable for this to become a major hurricane again. But I would like to see how it organizes tomorrow and Sunday coming out of that shear, because sometimes it looks like the core of the storm is intact. There shouldn't be an issue when it starts to re-strengthen. But there have been issues in the past where storms that have, hit peak intensity, they get sheared apart, and then they try to strengthen back, but they never really quite get back to, for one reason or another, to the way they once were.
Right.
So I really would like to see how the storm, reacts tomorrow and Sunday. How quickly does it get back to hurricane strength? How quickly does it strengthen from there? And then we can get a better gauge, I think, into what kind of system we might have as it approaches the East Coast.
Well, if it does develop the way the Hurricane Center is suggestive of for Wednesday or Thursday of next week, I can see a lot of television stations, a lot of radio stations going into their archives and pulling out stuff from Hugo because Hugo was what? Every bit of a Category 4
4,
storm.
931 millibars, 1989.
Right, and
Right.
then
And actually, if I remember, it was like in October. It was in October of '89. It was
Yeah.
pretty late.
yeah, so they might, this might be the biggest threat to that part of the country
In many years.
in many years.
Let's see. Phil Diamori wants to know, GFS or Euro is it better to follow for Florence? What's your choice?
Yes.
Yes. I will give a couple of extra points to the European.
Yeah, the European certainly has more power, so to speak, computing power. When we look at the ensembles of these two models, I think the GFS only has 26. The European has something like 51. So there's a little bit more potency and computing power, and it does tend to. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people refer to the Euro as the king. I wouldn't necessarily say that because
I never
Euro
used that term for
the
any
Euro
model.
has had its days. In fact, last winter it had a number of those kind of days. But
I try not to personalize that sort of stuff.
But in this particular case, in tracking a tropical system, I would lean again more toward the Euro as well. The Euro has been a little bit more consistent in showing a track that generally is moving inland toward the mid-Atlantic or southeast coast, whereas the GFS has been doing all kinds of craziness. You see last night's GFS run where they had the storm coming up and then kind of doing a loop.
Yeah,
kind of
right.
like Ginger or whatever.
Yeah. It when you see stuff like that, you just can't forecast it. Certainly not at this stage.
Right.
A week out in advance. Do they happen from time to time? Sure. Does it happen? Is it going to happen this time around? I don't know. Right now, we're trying to work out the first part of the equation, which is as it gets here.
Right.
Matt Steckler says the models are making the high way too strong. I think that will change and it will start trending back north.
Is that a hope? Are you forecasting with your head, Matt, or with your heart?
I will say, well, in which case, then weather enthusiasts, get all excited about all of this, and we talked about that last night.
Right.
But the argument against that, Matt, is the fact that the ridge has been underplayed by models for the last 4 or 5 weeks.
Right.
That's not to say it's. You might be right. Maybe it is. If you're right, if what you're saying is true, I think you're going to start. Then you would start to see the European trend toward the GFS rather than the other way around.
Right.
And right now we're seeing that the GFS is actually trending to the Euro. If you think of two different camps, the GFS and the European model, and you're looking for the referee to break the tie, so to speak, I think the Canadian is more apt to go with the European solution. And the Canadian is south of the European, is southwest of the European, but all the Canadian ensembles are to the northeast of the operational. Mm-hmm. So they all match up much better with the European model than with its own operational.
Right.
Jason Schaefer, do you think you address this? Coastal flooding because of the east wind and a new moon.
Well, the new moon is going to induce higher than normal tides even without a storm. So I'm sure that, let's say, next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the National Weather Service in New York is going to issue some kind of a special statement regarding the possibility of coastal flooding or higher than normal tides. As to whether or not this storm, Florence, is going to have any influence, as I said, it's taking that track more toward the southeast. Certainly there'll be swells that'll be propagating out from Florence like a gigantic egg beater in the ocean, and we'll probably see those even up here. And that may play a role in making things a little bit more rough. They may be issuing some kind of a heavy surf advisory or a rough surf advisory because of that, in addition to the higher than normal tide. So it's not going to be, if this were still the middle of the summertime, I'm sure that we would be seeing like red flags going up next week because of an undertow and whatever. But what I'm saying from earlier, it does not look as horrendous as a few days ago when they were literally bringing the center of this storm literally right up to Cape Cod and just south of Long Island or whatever. That would have been a horrendous situation. Now it's like 1,000 miles further out to the south of us, and so the threat is going to be considerably lessened, assuming that it stays that way when it gets here next week.
Scott Briller, did the models have trouble with the week leading up to Sandy? Scott, the models have trouble with the week leading up to drizzle. Okay? Yes, with the same thing. You know, the same jumping around, the back and forth, and then they kind of settle in on something, and then you watch the error, the margin of error just close, and that's where we're at right now. We're watching the margin of error gradually shrinking.
Well, as I pointed out last night, 6 days in advance of Sandy, the European had that wild a track that we had never seen really in our lifetime, or at least in my forecasting period. That is coming up, going kind of alluding to the fact that it was going to go out, and then all of a sudden making a sharp left turn into the Jersey coast. And you know, you look at that and say, well, that's interesting. If it happens, it's certainly going to be bad for us. But let's wait a while. Let's see if it turns away from that. And as it turned out, the European kept going with that same solution. And then what really started getting scary was that both the Canadian and the GFS said, hey, you know, that's not a bad idea. And they started to follow. And that's when, 2 or 3 days before Sandy arrived, that's when we knew we were in pretty big trouble.
John Schultz, can you safely say that Long Island is safe from Florence? I'm not, look, I'm thinking from what I'm seeing, to what I saw today and what I've been seeing, you know, in my mind, the threat is going to be to the south. Would I take it completely, you know, off the table? No. I want to wait through the weekend. So let's kind of wait through the weekend before we start, you know, narrowing it, you know, down in a serious way.
Right. Yeah, I just said, I'm sure that next week we're going to see some kind of advisory for rough seas, high surf, and whatever issued by the National Weather Service. It's just that, from my viewpoint, I'm sure Joe's viewpoint as well, as opposed to what we were looking at 2 days ago, now it looks like the threat for really cataclysmic, if I may use that term, or you know, terrible conditions has lessened noticeably. We're not taking it off the table. There will be some problems probably next week, but it doesn't look like what it did like 2 days ago.
Mark Carroll, when the hurricane hunters fly into the hurricane, won't they have better data to help refine the models? Well, they are going to actually have that happen tomorrow. There's an experimental flight that they're sending out, and they were going to wait till Monday for the first recon, but they've got some kind of NOAA test flight going out, so they decided, I guess, to fly into Florence. Yeah, the data does help. If they get a good sampling of data, it does help. At least you hope it helps.
Yeah.
But it does help in terms of you know, feeling at least a little more confident in the kind of accuracy that the model implies. Michael Manigault, will Florence be slower as it approaches the United States, or will it be a fast mover?
Well, yeah, you know, yesterday we were talking about this, how it looked like for a while the thing would just slow, according to the European, it would just kind of slow, kind of mosey in toward the Atlantic coast and just sit there for a while. What we looked at today, Joe, even if you take a consensus between the GFS and the European, now it looks like it's going to make almost like a beeline west-northwest toward the southeast coastline of the United States. That's not going to be all that good either. As we said yesterday, if you get a Cat 3 or 4, and if it's moving with any significant amount of speed, let's say over 20 knots, forward speed.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be moving that fast.
I don't know.
With the
high.
Either. Yeah, but, you know, it's not going to accelerate to 30 or 40.
No. It's not like, we're not looking at something like the 38 storm where, you know, it just got picked up and zoom like a rocket up the coast.
60 miles an hour.
But it looks like it's going to be moving faster now as opposed to just yesterday when the models were saying that it was going to be slowing as it approached the coastline. So
Daniel Kirby, your question, if the European model comes to fruition for you got a problem. If the European is correct, literally as it ran today, you have a serious issue. Daniel is in the mountains of Virginia, in the western part of the state, and for those of you who don't know, that area, some places have gotten 30 to 40 inches of rain in the last couple of months. He's already above normal for the month of September. He was above normal after September 1st for the whole month of September. The Lynchburg Dam was at a danger of breaking from the rains over the summer. Now, if that European model is correct, That's a big problem for your area, I would think. But again, let me emphasize here: it's a big if. A lot of what we're talking about right now are all big ifs. That's really what you're going to get 5 days, 6 days out in our minds, because there's still a lot of room for maneuvering here.
Speculation is rampant when a storm is not expected to make landfall for another 5 days, and you could sit there and you can go in your mind and say, okay, what will I do if the storm goes this way? But then again, 5 days, there's a lot of wiggle room still. That storm system could still continue on a track to the south. What is your favorite limerick? The trend is your friend.
The trend is your friend.
And the trend so far has been, with each passing run, to push that system a little bit more to the west and south. So right now it looks like the Carolinas are in the target zone, but that's not to say that a couple of days from now we might be talking more about northern Florida or Georgia. And there's still some room if as one of our readers just pointed out, if the high is not as strong, if the ridge is not as strong, it kind of weakens a little bit. It may open the door for more of a northerly track. But right now, from what we're seeing, it's more south.
Unless that upper high, if the western flank of the upper high is weaker, then okay, then you can make an argument that it'll turn northward. If you look at the European and the GFS, they're really not that different. They're the same, except in terms of the motion. The difference is that the European is about 150 miles to the southwest of the GFS. So where the GFS goes in at Hatteras, the European is closer to Myrtle Beach, Charleston. It's the European takes the low up into the western part of Virginia. The GFS takes it to Chesapeake Bay and Delaware Bay and actually slows it down for about 12 to 18 hours. They both kind of stall it out briefly. So they both are very, very similar in terms of how Florence reacts to the upper high. They're just 150 miles apart. We're going to see that error shrink. And I don't know which direction it's going to go, but I think you're going to see that error shrink over the next couple of days.
One of the nice things I like about the Tropical Tidbits site, and we have played it up to the hilt and sung its praises, one of the great things about that site is that you can take your cursor, go to where the hurricane or whatever tropical or any weather system, and you can go to the center of these systems and you can get the latitude and longitude, which is great, because what I did earlier today was I wrote down the latitude and longitude of Florence.
Of the L, that's forecast.
For the forecast for the GFS and also for the European. And then I just got an average of the two places and drew a map up. And the map that I came up with, Joe, had landfall, I believe, next Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, if you want to believe it this far out or whatever, near Wilmington, North Carolina. But again, that's taking into account the fact that the GFS is further north and the European is further south.
Southwest.
So we'll see.
Water temperatures are so high off the east coast and northeast coast. Will this storm cause water temperatures to go back to normal? Hey, Mike, you may see that actually happen before that because of the northeast winds over the next couple of days. There probably will be some upwelling and cooling of the ocean starting today and going right through the weekend and into Monday. So you might actually see the water temperatures drop off just from the big height of the north and the northeast winds. Let's see, just trying to see if we could squeeze in one last question. Okay, Judy Strandberg. We were supposed to be going on a cruise from New York City to Bermuda on Sunday.
Ooh.
It was Dramamine. It was just changed to Port Canaveral and the Bahamas. Are we going to be in for even worse problems with the new route? We're supposed to arrive in Port Canaveral on Tuesday.
No matter where you're going to go, whether you were leaving out of New York or Port Canaveral, keep in mind that we have an intensifying hurricane tropical system out there that, as I said a few minutes ago, is going to literally be acting like a giant egg beater in the ocean. And so that is going to generate quite a bit of swell activity. And I got to give these new ships credit, Joe. They have stabilizers that are much better than 10 or even 20 years ago. But the problem is that even the best of stabilizers, you have a problem with that pitching, that going up and down and up and down. So you're going to feel it, and you might want to bring along some Dramamine in one way, shape, or form for that trip to Bermuda.
Barbara Bender with the TD 8 and 9 forming. Did Florence pull them to follow? Doubtful. 9, I think, has a shot of going. Is probably going to go straight west and head toward the Leeward Islands. We could possibly have 2 hurricanes in play late this week, with Florence impacting the somewhere in the U.S. East Coast, and this TD9 that's forecast to strengthen by the Hurricane Center to a hurricane in the long range, approaching the Leeward Islands, which is probably the one place that a hurricane shouldn't approach, considering what happened last year. Rocco Fridella, the 2 highs that the models show could have crack in the armor and possibly catch the crack. That's what the GFS did. It basically split the northwestern part of that high is going to eventually weaken, and the system is going to try to move through it. So, but the question is, which model has the better view of the strength of that upper high? Because the European, they're both about the same. The European, in terms of coverage, the geography it coverage that it covers, but in terms of strength, the European is a bit stronger, and that's the 150-mile difference.
Right. Before we're coming up on sign-off time, but let me just put a quick plug in for my wife. She is one of the directors of the German-American Social Club in the Putnam Valley area tomorrow, 11 Kramer's Pond Road in Putnam Valley. We're having they're having their annual Oktoberfest tomorrow and Sunday. You're all welcome to come. You can go on my Joe Rayo Weather Facebook page and get all the details there. I saw Dennis Cassia, who is alluding to the fact that he may want to come with his wife Kim tomorrow, asking about the weather. The weather tomorrow, and I would say this in general for the entire tri-state area, Joe, look for more cloud cover than sun. I'm hoping we'll see a little bit of sun tomorrow breaking through, some pokes of sunshine, although the clouds may eventually get the upper hand. Temperatures will be in the 70s. I don't think we'll see any precipitation tomorrow. Sunday will be even chillier with northeast winds, 10, 15 miles per hour, maybe some gusts. Temperatures may not get out of the 60s on Sunday.
Right.
And the remnants of Gordon, former tropical cyclone Gordon, will be generating rain, moving into our area, I think, probably late in the day Sunday into Sunday night. And it looks like Monday is going to kick off the week next week with rainy skies and maybe some tropical rains courtesy of the remnants of Gordon.
I think it was Mike, I just want to make sure, Mark Bogey asked me about, just real quick to put the spaghetti plots up. So these are the hurricane tracking models. They're not to be used to make decisions on, just bear that in mind. But one of the things that we've seen is that the hurricane tracking models have that the cluster. I'm sorry. Let me bring them up again. I'm clicking back and forth trying to get everything right here. What the takeaway is that they're getting clustered closer together.
Right.
From the southernmost to the eastern, the southwesternmost to the northeasternmost. There's a cluster of them in the middle, and they're all getting very, very close. We don't have a bunch of them going out in all sorts of directions.
Spraying.
Right. So this kind of leads confidence to what we've been seeing today. And this is the GFS ensembles, which for the first time, much of the time this week, the GFS ensembles on their plots were all east of the operational. But for the first time today that I saw, they're actually many more of them are west of the operational run and west of the mean position. So that's a big change from the GFS. It might be hinting that on the next run it may be closer to the European. No guarantees, but it's just a guess on my part. Anyway, we got to go because it's 9:52 Eastern time. Just remember, folks, if wherever you're watching from, if a hurricane or a tropical storm is a threat, you want to make sure you get official information from your local government officials, or consult the National Weather Service at their website at weather.gov, or the National Hurricane Center's website at nhc.noaa.gov. Okay? I'm on at the top of the hour of FiOS 1 News, Long Island and New Jersey.
I'm on the top of the hour at FiOS 1 News, Lower Hudson Valley, and over the weekend you will have Andrew Pinheiro in the morning.
And I believe Jonathan is off tomorrow.
Oh, Addison is on
and
tomorrow.
Addison is on tomorrow night.
Okay.
But I'm guessing that Jonathan might be back on Sunday, but I'm not sure. And then Monday morning, we're all at full staff here. You've got Fitzgerald and Banson, meteorologists at law in the morning on Monday. Then you got Addison and Brittany at midday. And then you got Joe and Joe. But let's always remember that Joe gets top billing. And have a great weekend. I'm going to be live streaming tomorrow and Sunday on YouTube. So be sure to go to my YouTube channel and watch me over there.
And,
okay?
if you go on my Joe Rayo Facebook page over the weekend, I probably will be doing a live hit from the Oktoberfest, at least once, maybe twice, talking about everything from the fest to the weather to Florence to anything that
And let
pops
me know
in my
when
head.
you're doing it. Shoot me a message before you start it, because this way I'll put it. I'll share it onto my page.
Okay.
And you can also check. I've got a whole lot of stuff that I'm writing about this. You can either check the website out, meteorologistjoechaffee.com, or you can go to Patreon and look at everything over there, because I have extra stuff that's on my Patreon page. That's patreon.com, and then just search Meteorologist Joe Chaffee.
King of all media.
I'm
ladies and
everywhere.
gentlemen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Have a great evening, everybody, and a great weekend, and we'll hopefully talk to you over the weekend.
Okay.